In this video, we're going to look at the Enterprise Report Designer. There's a few different things that we're going to do within this video. The first of which is create a brand new report with some basic customer information in it. We're going to look at setting that report up and putting the columns in the order we want them, etc. The next thing that we're going to do is create a new view in the data dictionary within Enterprise and then create a brand new invoice format from it. So we're going to look at creating an invoice format from scratch. The next thing that we're going to do is create a new view for our dispatch note format or delivery note format, and then we're going to create a new delivery note based on that view, but we're going to actually use an existing delivery note format to create our new format, so we're not going to create that one from scratch. We're also going to look at report triggers, etc. while we're going through this video. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is create a new report from scratch. So to do that, because this is a customer report, I'm going to go to the customer module, and from there I'm going to switch dashboard to the reporting section. So that will then show me all of the reports that already exist within Enterprise. And because we're creating a new report, I want the Report Writer button, which is the little white icon up there. So when I click the Report Writer button, I will get the Report Writer wizard up, and it asks me what type of report I want to create. So we're just going to create a standard report this time. I'm going to click next, and now that we need to select what actual view or table that we want to actually look at for our report. Now, because this report is going to contain some basic customer information, I know that there's already a view or a table in there that's basically got a lot of the information that we want in there. So I'm going to select the customer profile table group, and that then shows us what the actual view is that goes under that. So you can see it's the customer profile form report view that it actually selects. So I'm just going to click next on that, and that will take us to the next part where we then need to select our fields. So I'm just going to select the fields that I want on my report. If there's any that I miss at this stage and I want extra ones, we can drag them on later. But we're going to have currency code on there, we're going to have customer code on there, I want customer email. I'm just going to add all these on as per the report designer document. Okay, so I think I've got all the fields that I want to put on to start with anyway. So I'm going to click next on that. The next stage that we get to is where we can do grouping and sorting on our report. Now on this particular report, because it's just going to be a list of customers' details, I don't want any grouping, so I'm going to leave that section blank, but I would like a sort on the customer code. So I'm just going to highlight customer code and then click the right arrow to move it across, and we can then in here select whether it's ascending or descending, and I'm going to set this to be ascending. Okay, on the next section we can add filters for a report, so if we want to filter by customer code, etc., we could do that. I'm just going to print, I want my report to print for everything, so I'm not going to add any on here. So I'm going to click next, and the next section is for the summary fields that we can have on here. Now this is for things like if we want to do a sum on a certain field, etc. We're not actually going to have any on our report, but just to show you how this works, if I was to move balance over there, so if I do in here, I can say how I want this to do. So if I want it to group by, on the report or the page, etc. So I'm going to actually do it for report. So this will group it by the whole report, and I can say what sort of calculation I want. So I'm going to have a sum. So if I was to do that, it would basically, on the balance field, it would put a sum field right at the bottom of the report, and it would add all the balances up. Okay, I don't want that, so I'm going to right click it and delete selected and get rid of that one off there. Okay, on the next section we then have the different layout schemes in here. I'm going to leave this as standard and as the normal orientation. We can look at changing that later. And the next thing is the type of report we want. Well, we're going to again leave it to form, we'll leave it to the default. Obviously you can change the look of the report in here. Okay, on the next section is where we can choose the default printer option. So if we always want it to go to a printer, or we always want it to go to a file, etc., we can define that in here. And on the next page we will be able to say what the default email and fax options are. Okay, so there's the email page, so I can put the default email message that I want in my report, etc., if I was to email this report, and similarly for fax. Okay, now here's quite an important part, because we actually need to give our report a name, how it's going to appear on the menu. So we're going to call this a customer detail report. So I'm going to enter that in both the title and the description. Okay, and here we can choose whether we want to preview it, modify it, etc. So I'm just going to say modify the report design, and I'm going to finish the wizard. Okay, now my report's on the screen, and I'm going to just maximize this window so we can see it properly. So it's obviously got all the fields that are specified on there. Automatically puts our company information at the top and our logo, etc., as per the customer, as per the system preferences. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do on this report is actually change it to be a different orientation. So if I go over here to the properties, or I can click the F4 button on the keyboard. If I press the F4 button, it brings up the properties, and I can use this little pin button here to pin the properties on so that this box stays on all the time. Now, as default, the property selected in here is the one for the report base. If I click into any of the fields here, it will change to the properties of that particular field or section of the report. So I actually want it to be on the main report. I'm going to go down and find the landscape option here. So we're going to set it to have landscape. So I'm going to change that from false to true. Okay, and you'll immediately see that the edge of our report moves out, so we've got a wider report section to work with now, because it's obviously going to print in landscape. Okay, so the next thing that we can do now is move some of these fields over. For instance, that field doesn't quite fit properly, so I can move that over there, and I can drag this over to wherever I want it. Obviously, as you see there, I can just use these to make the field longer or shorter, and also higher and lower on here, so I can adjust the height of them. So that goes for the same of pretty much any field. If I highlight it, you'll notice as I highlight it, it changes the property over here, so we can see what's in there. And I can change the name of this, double click into it, and I can change what shows there as well. Okay, the other thing I want to do, this box here I know is the page number. You can see there, LBL page number, it changes to when I do that, and I'm just going to drag that also to be over on the right hand side somewhere, so when I print it, my page number prints under my report title. And when it puts these fields on here, it puts them on in alphabetical order, so I'm going to need to change these about a bit, which I'll do in a second. The other thing that I want to do is, if there's any fields here that are going to print numbers, I want to change the format of these to make sure that they're printing as a number, and to also make sure that they're printing as to 2 decimal places. So when I click a field, you'll notice that I've got a little arrow that pops up there. So if I just use the little arrow, and then I can click the format string button here, and that'll bring up a little format box. Now on here at the moment it's formatting as general. I'm going to change it to number, and I'm going to do #.00, which means it's only going to do it to 2 decimal places, and OK that. And then I can go and do that for any other fields that I've got. So credit limit is also going to be a number field, so I'm going to do exactly the same for that. Okay, and OK that. Okay, so next thing that I'm going to do, I'll just show you how to do a couple of fields before I go and do the whole report, is obviously move these things about. So we've got the headers for the fields here in grey, and then we've got the actual field here where it's going to display our value. So let's say that we want the up onto the document, we want balance right over to the right hand side. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to click that one, and then I'm going to hold down the control key and click the lower one, and that will actually highlight 2 fields, and we can do that for a lot of fields. And I'm just going to use my right arrow key here to actually move this over. So I'm going to just use my right arrow to move it right across to the other side, so we're going to have it right over here eventually somewhere. Okay, and I can do that with any of the fields. If I just click one of the fields and move it, I can obviously move it left, right, up or down, etc. Now another important thing is that when I'm moving it, it obviously moves it in so much of a distance when I use each keystroke. If I want to move it slightly less, if I hold down the control key, I can then fine-tune my field to move it a little bit, so I can just basically move it into position to get it exactly where I want it, like so. It's quite an important tip, otherwise you'll struggle to get the fields lining up, etc. So what I'm just going to do on my report now is move all my fields about on the report so that it's actually showing in the right section. So if I just pick up some of my other fields and move them across, customer code is going to go over to the left hand side like so. So you see when I move it, it sort of takes them out of line slightly, so I'm just going to then click each one and just control on it and just move it up slightly, so customer code. And I can also obviously extend the field, so if customer code is going to be could possibly be quite large, I can do that. Now when I extend a field and it overlaps another field, you notice we get these little red arrows on the report, which just basically means that I've overlapped. So that's quite useful to see if you've made any mistakes where you've put one field on top of another, etc. So it's easy to see if there's any overlapping happening on the report. So what I'm going to do now is just go through and do the rest of the report in the format I want. Okay, so I've put all my fields in the positions that I want them in. Now you notice on my report I have got some little red arrows denoting that these fields are slightly overrunning, but it's only the actual labels for the fields, the sort of description, and it's going to be a very, very small amount that they're hopefully overlapping. Now I prefer to have them slightly overlapping like that if I can't line them up exactly, because it means otherwise we'll get gaps, white gaps between the grey bar when we print the report. So I'm going to leave them like that. As long as all the labels print okay and we actually get all the text on them, I'm not too worried about that. The main thing is that none of the actual value fields are actually overlapping, so we're not going to have any corruption on our values printing out on our reports. So I think I'm quite happy with that. I can always come back in and change it later if need be anyway. So I'm now going to save and close on my report. Now that my report's saved, I now need to refresh the list of reports to see hopefully my new report in the list. So I'm going to click this refresh button here, and we now have our customer detail report on the menu. So if I double click on my new customer detail report, I'll get the print dialog box up, which is the standard print dialog we get for any reports in Enterprise. And I'm just going to preview my report, and hopefully it prints to the screen and I can see the details on my report. So there we go. So we can see we've got some slight problem in here. The fax number is actually overwrapping or wrapping round, so I'd need to extend that out, make one of the other fields slightly smaller, etc. So there's a few changes that I would normally need to make to this report. Also, I haven't extended this bar across here, but apart from that, it don't look too bad. The email needs to be a little bit longer to incorporate a longer email address, but I think you get the idea on how we can move the fields about and what we can do with the report basically. So if I do want to make these amendments now, if I close my report down, if I highlight my report on here and this time use the little sort of yellowy icon, the report designer icon, and open it up again, I'll be in exactly the same screen as I was before. So now I can, maybe I want to extend this across all the way so that I actually get that line all the way across. Also obviously I need to make some of these other fields smaller and others bigger. Just something that I didn't show you previously was if I use the control key to highlight two fields and I now want to make that field smaller, if I then drag it, can you see that it adjusts both field lengths? So it's easier than doing the first one than trying to get the second one exactly the same. So on mine I think the email was sort of wrapping round, the field was a bit too short. So I'm just going to try and get that on there like that, so I'm going to leave that. And obviously I need to move these other fields, etc. over as well to get it all to tie in. I'm not going to worry about that now. So that's how we can get back in and actually change the report. So that basically covers creating a new report with some customer detail or sales order detail, whatever it might be that you want to create a new report for. We're now going to create a brand new invoice format based on a new view that we're going to create. Now you will need some SQL knowledge to be able to create views. It's not really that straightforward to do unless you know how to link tables together, etc., using SQL scripts. So the first thing that we're going to do is create our new view. Now we could use the existing view that's there for an invoice format and amend that view, but unfortunately if we then upgrade to a new version, all the standard views get overwritten. So it's really not recommended to do that, or you're going to have to keep going back and redoing everything that you've done in a previous version. So we always recommend to create a new view if you're going to have additional fields, etc. on them. For instance, in this actual invoice format, we want to add a custom field that we've added onto the customer table, so we want to print that onto our invoices, which is quite a common thing that people want to do. Okay, so to do that, the first thing we've got to do is go into System Manager and then go into our data dictionary. That'll open our data dictionary, and we need to go to Add View, which is a button on the toolbar here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is give our view a name. Now, the standard one is Customer Invoice Form Report View. That's the normal view that an invoice would use, but we're going to put the word bespoke on the end, and when I tab out of that field, it will actually put an _C. Everything we do that's sort of a custom field or a custom view will put _C on. It's just so that we know exactly what is custom and what is a standard view. Okay, and then we can do our select statement. So this is where you need the SQL knowledge to know what select statement to do. Now I've already got my select statement saved on my desktop, so I'm just going to come out of that a second, and I've got the customer invoice report script just to save typing it in now. I'm going to just copy and paste that in. To my data dictionary here. So if I get rid of what's there and then put my paste in there. So basically what it's going to do is here it's going to select from where I want it to select from, and I've obviously got my custom field in here. So we've actually aliased the customer invoice form report view to CIFRV, and all that does is it saves typing it in every time we mention it. So we tell it what that is here, and then onwards here we then say CIFRV and CIFRV. It just saves typing in that long view name every time, basically. So in here, this is where we obviously say what our SQL is. So when I'm happy with that, I click Save. Okay, so when it saves, it then shows us our view. So because we did a select star from the previous view name, it basically puts all the fields on that were on the previous invoice view. But down the bottom, we've also got our existing software, so that's good. That looks to have done exactly what we wanted it to do. So the next thing that we're going to do while we're in here is actually set our criteria up that we're going to use for running our report. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to have some criteria for the invoice code field. So if I find invoice code, if I just sort by column name on here and go to find the invoice code, which is down here. Okay, what we're going to do is add some criteria for that. So when I highlight the field, you'll see we get the properties for the field over here on the left hand side. So what I'm basically going to do is then say that when we use the criteria for invoice code, where do we want the values to look up for our criteria? So we want it to obviously show a list of invoices when we go into the criteria for our report. So we're going to have a dynamic list so that it's actually going to look at a certain list, and we're going to look at the customer invoice table. So select that in there. The pull down column within there is going to be customer invoice. I can have a search for it or scroll down. Shouldn't be too much in here for me to look for. On the other hand, invoice code even. Okay, so there's my invoice code, and then what I can then do is have additional filters on that. So it's going to look at the customer invoice table, invoice code column, so it's going to hopefully show us the list of invoice codes. And the last thing I want to do, because I know this table contains other types of records, I think it contains credits, etc., I also need to add a filter here to say only show me invoices. So we're going to have, if I search for type in there, and I want the type field, okay, and then in list is fine, and then I only want it to show invoices. So if I do that and click OK, we'll now see that it populates this down here. I can extend this here, and it says customer invoice type in invoice. So it's only going to show us invoices when we do our criteria. So I'm now going to save and close my view. Okay, and go back to Enterprise, and the next thing we're now going to do is create a brand new report based on that custom view that I've created. So I'm going to go back to the customer module, because this is going to be a customer report, and I'm going to go into reports, and I'm then going to go and create a new report. So report writer icon again. So this is similar to what we did before, but this time we're actually going to create a form report, because it's going to be like an invoice form, as it were. So in here we can tell it what the form name, so it gets an idea of what we're actually creating here. So if I type an invoice form in there, I want invoice form, and the report type in here is going to be 1165. I can just type that in actually. I can't. Okay, 1165. And this I think is used for if you restore the report back to its original format, it looks at what it should restore it to, basically. So if I click next, we then need to select our table group like we did on the previous section, and in here we now need to select our bespoke view. So I'm going to type in bespoke in there, and it will hopefully find it, because it's the only one in there. It's automatically selected it, and you can see that it's now selected my bespoke invoice view. So if I click next, I can then get on to selecting the fields that I want. Now in the report document, it tells us to select all the fields that we might possibly need in here at this point. I'm going to do it slightly differently, up to you which way you find easiest. But what I'm going to do is add a few fields on here at this point, and then I can drag more fields on later. It just saves when we first open the report up, we've got 30 fields or so, and we need to drag them all about the screen, which can be quite difficult because they get in the way of one another, etc. So what I'm trying to do now is just select fields that are going to print in the various parts of the report. So I'm just going to add bill to name and address, which will obviously print at the top. Invoice code will probably be at the top as well, but I'm going to add some other bits that are going to print into the detail, such as the item name. And I also want some things that are going to fit into the footer as well, so I'm going to add the subtotal rate in as well. So by that, I've just got one or two fields that are going to print in each section of the report. So if I click next, it's also quite important when I selected them fields that I select any group or sort fields that I want to use, because obviously it's easier to do it at this stage rather than going through and adding additional grouping sorting later, although it can be done. So I'm going to use invoice code for both my grouping and for my sorting, and I want it to sort ascending. Oops. So I'm going to leave that like that and click next, and now we can do our filter. So if you remember on our view, we did a filter on invoice code. So if I now find my invoice code field, which is there, took me a while to find it there, and then I'm going to do an in list option here, and there we can tell that our filter's working okay, because we've only got a list of invoices. I'm not actually going to select any in here, but I'm just going to say invoice code in list. Okay, and next. And now we can add any summary fields, which is going to be sort of sums and things like that. I'm not actually going to put anything on there, so I'm going to click next on that, and then I'm going to select the type of report. So we're going to have a form report, and we're going to have it informal, and this is where I can now select my default printing options. Just going to click next on that. I can obviously select my default email options and fax options. So if I email and fax the reports, they'll want a certain bit of text to print on there, etc. So the next thing I'm going to do is name my report, and we're going to call it customer invoice. Okay, so there, key it in, and I'm just going to modify the reports design at this point. So obviously I need to add more fields on and do a few extra bits with it. So when I click finish, it should then open my report up. So now my report's saved and it's opened up on the screen. I'm just going to open it all the way up so that I can have a look at it and see what I need to do with it. So obviously it's fairly simple at the moment because there's not too much on there. Now I need to do quite a lot with this report, so I'm not going to go through everything in this video, but I'm just going to show you a couple of bits on how to amend this report. Okay, so to start with, if we need to change this box here, or the size of the fields in this box, you can see we've got a little sort of white bit at the top here, and I'll only describe it as. If I click that, it then highlights the whole box, and I can basically move it around or drag it up or down if I need to. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is changing the alignment of a field. So let's presume that the field is printing slightly out of line. Let's select invoice code, for example. So if I press the F4 key, I'll bring up the properties for the field I'm on, or the section I'm on. I'm just going to pin these on anyway because it's quite useful to see, and I'm going to extend that over a little bit. Okay, so when I highlight a field, what we've got here is we've got an alignment section, text alignment. Now it's on middle left at the moment, but we can set it to wherever we want. So if we want it centered, or if we want it over to the right, or we want it at the top, etc., we can choose exactly where we want this to be. So if I select this on middle right, you'll see how the text of that field then jumps across, and when we obviously print the field, it's going to print over to the right hand side. I'm going to just move that back so that it's back in the correct place. Okay, now invoice code is I'm going to probably want that up in the header somewhere, so under here like so. I can obviously line that up with the customer invoice field here with a bit of text. I can also change this text in here if I want double clicking in there and change it, and I may want that to be a larger font, or change the font. And I can do that in a couple of ways. If I have the layout toolbar here, I can actually change that, so click on there and then do it in the standard way that you would, make that larger, change the font, etc. Or I can use the properties over here because we've got all of the fonts, etc., borders and everything over here. So if I click that, I can then change these bits in detail by using the properties. So let's say that we do need a border on a field, and let's just choose the subtotal as an example. Obviously the subtotal would normally need to print down in one of the footers of the report, in the group footer, etc. So I'd need to move this down into here, like so that it's in the right place to group on that particular invoice. I wouldn't have it in the details section with all these other fields. I'd want sort of the item details to print in here, the individual line details. Same as bill to, name and address. I'd probably want that actually at the top here, so I can drag that up over there like so, and obviously make that slightly bigger, and I can have other fields in here as well if I want to. Okay, so for the subtotal, I actually want a line to go on the top of it because it is a total. So if I go into the click the little, go over to the borders over here, and use the drop down arrow, it will actually show me where I can put borders. So obviously this button on the top, we'll put one on the top. You can put one all round, no borders, bottom, left and right. So we actually want one on the top like so. So I'm going to choose top and then get rid of the drop down, And what we need to make sure if we've got a border on there is that we at least have a border width of at least 1, so that it will actually put a border on, otherwise we still won't see anything on there. So if I then go back here, I can now see that I've got a thin line on top of my subtotal rate field, so that has actually put a border on the top of it. The other thing that we need to do is make sure that our group footer prints at the bottom. So if I click group footer, then click the little box, and I need to just click print at bottom, it just ensures that it's going to print at the bottom of our grouping, at the bottom of our report, as it were. Once again, if I've got any currency fields on here, or fields that I only want to print to 2 decimal places, I need to make sure that these are formatted correctly. So if I highlight the field, such as the subtotal here, and then click the little arrow that appears, I need to click the little button on the format string and set that to number, and then make sure it's only going to go to 2 decimal places, like so. I did show you this on the previous report, but I'll just show it again very quickly now. To move a field, basically, we can highlight it, and we can use a control key to highlight more than one, like so. And I can use the click again on them while holding control to deselect them. And I can basically move fields along to the left, right, up or down if there's enough room. So if I just use my left arrow, we can see it moves it left, and obviously I can, if I hold the control key down like before, I can then move it only slightly. So we've got the fine-tuning option on there, exactly the same as what we had before. The other thing that we need to make sure of on our report is our criteria section. So if I click the criteria builder button, that'll pop up with our criteria. And if you remember, we were sorting out our criteria as early as when we were creating the view. We had to tell it where to look for the criteria from the invoice table, and then we added it onto our report when we went to create it. So this criterion here is fine, except that in here we need to change this to be none, because we're having no other criteria on there. Otherwise, when you run the report, it'll expect you to define another set of criteria. So what I'm going to do now, having done the basics that I need to do on my report, obviously if I print this invoice at this point, it's going to look pretty poor, to be honest with you, because I haven't got nearly enough fields on there, etc. So what I'm going to do now is just go through and add the rest of the fields on. Now, to add fields that aren't actually already showing on the report, if I just click the little fields button there and just pin that on as well, so that I get my list of fields, you can obviously see that I've got a whole list of fields that I can put onto my report. So if I then need to put some of these onto the report, let's just say that we want quantity ordered or quantity shipped, maybe. If I just click that field and then hold down my mouse button and then drag it, I can basically drag it onto the report like so, and then I can do all the formatting, etc., that I need to do with it. So you can see there that when I've put that on, it's actually put it in a different format, or the other of different font, etc. The other fields were into Homer 8, and this one's been put on in Times New Roman 9.75. So I'd need to change that. But if I want to do all that together, I can actually highlight multiple fields like so, and then just go and set the font, and it'll set them on all of them and the size on all of them, which is quite important. So I don't have to keep doing this every single field I drag on. I can actually multi-select them later and then go and change them as a group. And to multi-select, I can also click in a blank bit of the report and actually drag over certain fields, and you see that selects them all. So I don't have to use the sort of control and click method that I've been using. We can also drag over if it's quicker for you to do so. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just go and add all the rest of my fields onto my invoice and hopefully make it look a bit more respectable. I've added quite a lot of fields onto my report now. I've got most of the header details correct. I've put my fields I want in here. They may not all quite line up quite nicely at the moment. I'll have to print it and review it, etc. But I've just got onto this section now. I'm going to put the customer PO number in there, and below it I want a line going across the page. So I thought I'd just show you how to add a line, etc. onto here. So if I go to the toolbox option up here, we've got various different things we can put on, such as labels, which are basically all these grey things that we've got in here. They're just effectively labels. I want to create a line, so I'm going to do line there, and I'm just going to basically add my line going across my page under my customer PO, like so. So that's basically how you can add a line and labels. Now for the labels, what I've actually been doing, rather than just creating new labels every time and having to get the shading and the fonts and everything changed on each one, I'm basically using the existing labels that were put on the report at the time. So for instance, I've been using this item name label. Now if I right click and copy it, or I can do Control and C to copy it, and then either Control V or right click and paste, what it will basically do is give me another label called with the same description of item name. So if I want item name to then go in here under this line, this is going to be where my headers are. Basically I can then double click in there and change it to wherever I want. So similarly for any of the other fields that I might put on here, such as quantity shipped, I can now change this to be quantity shipped, and then drag that further along wherever I'm going to have my quantity ship column. So that's what I'm doing. I just find it easier and quicker to create the labels that way, rather than dragging them on from scratch and probably having to format them differently and certain things like that. So I'm just going to carry on putting the rest of my details on my report now. Nearly finished. I've now added most of my details on here, so all my detail lines. I've put the headers there quite as neatly as I can, really. At this point I might need to tweak them later when I actually look at printed invoice. What I'm now just going to do is just put the footer fields in. So all we do basically, because it knows that it's a group footer, and if I click the little arrow here, it basically knows what it's grouping on effectively. Basically all I need to do is drag the fields down the bottom here, and it will automatically total on them for our invoice. So for instance, I want the freight to also be down here, so that it knows that it's going to print that down here. So if I look for freight rate and just drag it down there, and then we've got other, so we can drag it down there. So basically all I'm doing is dragging all the fields that I want into the relevant section. Fairly straightforward. So I'm going to add these fields in here. I'm going to put some more descriptions for them alongside them, and then I should be finished. Okay, so now I think I've pretty much finished my invoice, so I'm going to save and close it. It's always a good idea also, while you're making changes to your invoice, if it's quite a big project you're working on where you're changing a lot of fields, it's always worth saving it every once in a while when you're happy with it, just to make sure that if you do make a mistake you haven't got to start from the beginning again. Okay, so if your report doesn't already show on the menu, you need to refresh it. Mine's already there because I've been out and in a couple of times while I was doing that format. So if I obviously need to go back into it, I can highlight it and click that, but for the time being I'm actually going to try and actually run my my report in a second. But if I just go and have a look, double click the customer invoice one and have a look at it, then defaults my invoice, and go into the filter criteria. What I just need to make sure of in here is that I actually get my desired filter where I can select from invoice number ranges and there's no credits or anything else in there, which, as we checked before in the criteria builder, that looks absolutely fine. So I'm quite happy with that criteria, etc. So before we actually do go and try and print our report, there's one other very important thing that we have to do. At the moment, if we were to print our invoice out, it wouldn't actually update the printed status on the invoice because it doesn't know to do that. We haven't told our new report anywhere that it actually has to update the printed status. So what we've got to do is create a trigger in SQL that we then assign to our report to tell it what to do. Okay, so that's the next thing we're going to do, and then finally we can have a look what our report actually looks like when it's printed. So what we need to do is go into SQL and actually create our trigger. So we're going to go to SQL Studio Management. And I've actually got my trigger already saved. So if I go to my invoice trigger.sql on my desktop, it'll actually open it anyway. In the document, it tells you how your trigger should be made. So obviously I need to connect through to where my database is, and on my machine it's just ./SQL Express, which is a standard instance. And now I'm going to change that to look at my Demo UK company, because that's where I'm actually doing my my report. And what this is going to do is basically create a trigger. So I need to make a couple of changes to my predefined trigger, because I'm going to actually make sure that it creates it with the right details. I want it named correctly. I'm just going to create customer invoice form report view bespoke _C trigger, and we need to tell it what it needs to create that trigger on. So it's going to be customer invoice form report view bespoke _C. Okay, and down here should be exactly the same as what the trigger was previously. All these triggers are in the back of the report document as well, so the standard sort of invoice and everything like that is all in there. The only thing you'll need to change is the details I've just changed there. So hopefully now, if I execute this query, it should run, and it says commands completed successfully. So I've now created the trigger. So what I now need to do is go back into my report and actually tell it how to use that. So if I close SQL for the time being, don't need to save my changes really. Okay, I'll get rid of that other SQL I opened. I'm going to go back into my report in Enterprise, so go back into the report designer. And obviously if there's other changes I want to make to the report, I can make them at the same time in here. Okay, so what we're now going to do is go into the properties, and I can either use F4 or click the little properties box, up to me what I do there. I'm going to pin them on. Let's just open the report up full screen as well. Okay, and there's some properties on this report that I need to set basically. So if I scroll down, I need to find the update printed status, just near the bottom. These are in alphabetical order. So update printed status there, we need to set that to be true. And the update script, we're then gonna put in there what we actually want it to do. So it's going to be an SQL statement that we put in there, which is just going to be update customer invoice form report view bespoke _C set space is printed equals to 1. Okay, so there's our update script. So that should now do our update, and it'll look at that trigger we created to actually update the right field, etc. Now what we're going to do is save and close out of our report, having made that important change, and we're actually going to try and print our invoice out. So let's go into find invoice. Do this through batch document printing if we want to, it's up to us how we do it. Okay, and what the important thing I want to do is find an invoice that isn't printed. So I can see the printed flag in here, and I'm just going to select the first one on the list, invoice 222. This is all demo data. And now if I click the print button, I should hopefully get my new invoice format. It defaults to both of them, but I just want my customer invoice format, and I'm going to try and print that to the screen. So obviously I can see how it looks as well. I'm sure there's be a few things I might need to change on it, but hopefully it's going to print okay, and it'll update that printed status most importantly. Okay, so there's my report. I can see I've got some borders and things. I've got a few problems here with my report layout that I need to resolve. I've got my item details printing okay. I've got some gaps in there that I shouldn't have in there. You can see the alignments down here. So there's quite a few things that I will need to do to this report to get them in here. I think the reason these aren't printing is because the text doesn't print in there properly. It doesn't fit into the field size that I've specified on there, because these are quite large fields. And I've got some borders there that need taking out. Okay. But basically, there's my invoice. Not too bad for a 5-minute effort. And if I then close this down and go back to here and refresh this list, we can see our printed flag getting updated, which is brilliant. So apart from a few other modifications to that report,